The year is 1962. The place is Willowpoint Falls. Nobody talks about what happened in the school cloakroom 10 years ago. Now, in the dead of night, Frankie Scarlatti is going to find out why. Hey, all you tricksters and treaters, welcome back to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, a podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, horror movies, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your host, Tyler Bentz, and this is your other host,
Woody Brown.
What's up, dude?
Pretty sure you just said horror movies.
Yeah, it did sound it did get a little close to that line, didn't it? Speaking of horror sounds, we have maybe the loudest two chairs in existence.
Mm-hmm.
So this week, we're covering a beloved movie to myself, and apparently there is like a pretty decent-sized cult sort of following behind this movie. It's weird because I haven't seen it in so many years, but out of all horror movies, there's something about like the cover of the tape I remember so fondly, the just the vibe, and something about it has like stuck with me all these years. And maybe on like just a visual level, it's the number one. I'm not saying it's my favorite number one horror movie. However, it is definitely up there. But the movie that we were talking about is The Lady in White.
Now, I got to tell you, the thing about this cover for me was I avoided it whenever I was a kid because it came out, like when we were relatively young. Even just the cover creeped me out, and just the premise of it kind of creeped me out whenever I was a kid. So I don't remember watching it or at least giving it, a try whenever I was a kid. But I've since watched it. And, of course, own a copy on VHS. Yeah, man, there is something, like, visual about it that, to me, just looks like Halloween, Right. I mean, like, I just think they did that piece perfectly. It's what I think a lot of movies have since tried to do, but just can't quite get it right.
Yeah, I think there's something in it, too, where, we'll get into it here in a second, but I think there's something about you and I both. Maybe me a little more. Well, for sure, I'm obsessed with The Wonder Years.
Yeah, me too.
I know we're both big fans of that show, and there's something about like the way they filmed that show that gave it this sort of amber, kind of like washy glamour shot, kind of like like blurriness kind of thing.
Yeah,
and it kind of does the same thing with this movie because the movie takes place in around Rochester, New York, in 1962, and also you're kind of being told this story, which I didn't really realize this back in the day, but I did in rewatching it. It's the whole movie is kind of narrated. It's a retelling of the guy that's now an adult, of what he experienced as a kid, and so I think that was intentional of that sort of like romanticized, glossy, look back into youth, and it's cool because it's in the 60s, so you get all that like amazing like music and old school, crappy kind of costumes, and it's really cool.
Dude, I loved how it opens where you're kind of following this guy. He's got like a brown sort of trench coat. Honestly, it kind of reminds you a little bit, other than like it being set in the early 60s, it kind of reminds you of like the Home Alone dad, in the airport.
Right.
You don't see this guy's face. You just kind of see him coming out of an airport, getting into a taxi.
Where to?
Willowpoint Falls, please.
You got it.
And just like a line that immediately stood out to me was like, the taxi driver's like,
My wife's gonna have a fit when I tell her you were in my cab. Because she reads everything. She reads all the time. She read your last book. What do you call that? A Fog in the Night?
Right.
Scared the living daylights out of her. I told her, take it easy. It's just a story.
So you get this like sense of like, oh, like this guy is like a relatively famous author, right? And
kind of like a Stephen King.
Yeah, exactly. And we're like diving into his childhood
Right.
where like, perhaps eventually kind of inspired him to become an author about this kind of scary stuff.
Yeah, I liked that they also kind of featured this little, as a kid, he was kind of the nerd. He was picked on. He was pretty isolated. But I love that they included, it picks up on Halloween Day, 1962. And, first of all, I love, it's like this really cool kind of, I don't know, what would that be called in film? I'm sure our buddies Luke and Ellis and Brad would know, but where you're kind of like, it's sort of like I don't know, you're kind of following this like little journey of like him riding to school on his bike and like you're seeing all like the shops and everything. And then it kind of like, you're kind of just like with the person as they're kind of making their way, in their day. And so then it shows up at the school and there's just this wild ass party in class. The kids are just going bonkers. And then it has this moment, which I really love, where he gets up in front of the class and like tells like this story. And like some of the kids kind of make fun of him.
And now, class, Frankie Scarlatti has written a new story especially for this occasion.
The Beast That Destroyed London by Frankie Scarlatti. Be quiet. A horrible sea monster terrified the citizens just because he wanted to. One day, the pre-hysterical beast rose from the watery depths, covered with seaweed, and began to swallow the London citizens by the dozen.
Did he brush with crest to prevent cavities?
Quiet, Donald.
But then, the other little girl that likes him is like, I wish I was as weird as you.
Yeah, dude, two quick observations, man. So like, as a viewer up to this point, immediately I was like, that's basically Tyler as a kid. And no wonder he likes this movie. And then also, I got to talk about one of my favorite characters in the movie. And it's just kind of like a weird sort of, I guess they're just like, I don't know, we need some comic relief. Let's make the kid Italian, and then he's going to have the classic Italian grandparents.
Which is like...
Dude, the grandparents are the best, dude.
Silenzio.
See you, Grandpa! Charlie!
Go easy on him, Ma.
Oh, sure. Ma dove ha pigliato quelle sigarette? Il dottore ha detto di non fumare. Where do you get those cigarettes?
What's a cigarette? Ma che dici? Che stai dicendo? Assunta, aiuto me. I am on fire. Vieni qua.
Well, I will say this. They are the best, but boy, they really dig in deep on that smoking joke.
Yeah. Well, oh my gosh, dude.
Like
yeah,
10 times.
10 times. Hey, what's your grandpa doing? They're sitting down for dinner. Hey, what's grandpa doing? Or what's Papa doing? And he's just like, he's drowning himself in the bathtub because I caught him smoking.
Yeah.
Oh
it's funny, too, that you brought up how much I looked like the kid. What's really funny, and a lot of our listeners probably won't know this, but before you got your ears pinned, you looked...
Come on, dude.
You looked so much like him as a child.
Dude, you just like write these ideas down of like ways to describe just absolute fiction to the listener so that they just think I'm just like, just cut it out. Listen though.
Oh, well, real quick, in association with what I just said, if you don't know Woody and I, we've said it a billion times, but we were in a band for years and years and years. And this is the kind of thing that we would do when we would meet new people. Like, we would just make up something that is completely random and just, like, go with it like it was reality. And then the person had no choice but to kind of
I mean, I think we talked about this before on an episode where we just pretended to be Australian for an entire...
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I say the entire night. At some point, we just gave it up, and those folks didn't, they're none the wiser. But
so the cast is, like, really cool. The grandparents... I had never seen them before. A couple things about the cast. Well, first off, let's say it was produced, directed, and composed by a guy named Frank LaLoggia.
Nice.
Who also raised all the money to make the movie, which was $4.7 million, which in 1988 was kind of a big deal. Another thing that's really interesting and really cool is he shot it all in his hometown. And it was actually based around a story that was like an urban legend that he had heard since he was a little kid.
Man, that's funny. Like, I wondered that. It does sort of like the way that it's shot. I feel like now knowing the name of the director.
Yeah.
Him being Italian.
Italian, right.
You know, I feel like in a way as I was watching it, because I mean, truth be told, I wanted you to do all the research on this background on the movie. I kind of felt like it was like a love letter, an ode to his childhood in some way.
Well, yeah,
and so
100%.
now that you say that, it's like, oh, he's probably, you know, kind of doing a more comical take on his own, like, sort of family in some way with his grandparents and stuff. And then maybe even, like, playing on that. Maybe he was like the main character, Frankie, whenever he was a little kid. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
So it did very much like, it comes off as a story that sort of feels like that naturally, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, it's really cool. I will say this, and I thought this several times while I was rewatching the movie, and I you'll never hear me say this very often at all, but this movie could really be remade into a badass, like, modern day horror movie, because it really is like you can kind of see in, you know, it was filmed in 1988, and you can kind of see well, first of all, there were some really genius things, really brilliant ways that they utilized, like, technology and all that, and just his, you know, Frank Laloggia's filmmaking is it to me, it's brilliant because he's kind of like covering a lot of ground and doing a lot of different things and kind of doing them all pretty successfully. I mean, there's a few weird kind of little things, but again, I think a lot of that was in the limitations of the time. And so, yeah, it's just like, I was wondering though, like, how much of this, you know, once I found out that this was kind of based on an urban legend, which actually is apparently in a place called the Durand Eastman Park in Rochester, New York. But you know, to me, the most sort of iconic part, and you know, you see it on the cover of the movie, is him in the cloakroom, you know, with his like little mask on. And so I wonder, like, after finding out a little bit more about the director, was that something that happened to him maybe, or because it's such a unique but terrifying idea.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, like, if you mixed, well, too quickly, I have to respond to whether or not I think it should be remade. I gotta say no, because, like, I feel like they would, modern day, they would sort of rely too much on, like,
oh, I know what you're
gore
saying.
or, like, you know, like,
well, or lean in way too much on the sort of civil rights aspect.
Well, kind
was
of, but I
important.
mean, like, that's actually an aspect of the movie that I really liked, actually.
Me too.
But, you know, it was kind of shocking. Because they use some pretty derogatory terms in the movie. And I was kind of like, whew, man, you know, first thought, obviously, this would never make it this far nowadays. But then two, that's one thing about this movie that's kind of incredible to me, but then at the same time sort of kind of blends into the confusion a little bit, but not really. You know, you've got this overarching sort of like theme of this kid who, well, I don't know if you want me to go into like the plot a little bit or whatever, but like,
yeah, I kind of don't want to like ruin it necessarily, so I kind of just want to like touch on it like here and there. So yeah, go for it.
But they're basically, you've got this overarching plot where this kid essentially sees a ghost, and then there's this mystery surrounding basically these series of child murders,
which is genius.
Yeah,
the way they
then mixed into that, there's this like racial tension that is like so real, man. Like that's something that, like, I don't know, it just felt authentic, you know. The way that they put it into the movie, and you can see, I don't know, I just thought that was a really cool way that he made it more realistic. Like,
I did feel, however, that, boy, the resolve for all that was probably the darkest part of the whole thing.
Yeah. But like, that's what I'm saying. It's like, I mean, that's pretty real.
Yeah. Like you were saying, like sort of some of the language, and I mean, is sort of jarring as it is for us to like hear some of these things and like racial slurs and all that. Like I do appreciate it because, you know, in 1988, as much as you hate it, which, I mean, you can tell the director is like, you know, like pro civil rights, you know,
big time, yeah.
Your main character, like the kid has like a crush on a little black girl in the class, and then that girl's dad is the janitor, who is a black man who is wrongly accused of you know, some crimes and stuff. And so you see like little moments where, you know, the characters that you like are all in, you know, they're like the good guys. And so, but I don't know. I have thought like after, like what's funny is because seeing it as a kid, I don't remember any of that stuff.
Right.
And I almost do wonder if it could have been a little more like a little cleaner if you didn't have that. But then I wonder if you would lose a lot if you took some of it. Because I mean, the way it resolves, you could take it all away. And I mean,
well, I just wish. I mean, like, are we just really not talking about what happens in the movie?
No. We can go into it.
Because if I remember correctly, I went through all 13 or 12, like almost minute by minute.
Well, here's
like,
my thing.
I don't think we're spoiling anything, man. This thing came out in 1988.
Yeah, but there are a lot of people that haven't seen this movie.
We spoiled the village, but we're not spoiling this, bro.
I mean, we didn't totally spoil the village. I'm just saying, let's not say who the killer is. Everything else is on the table.
Okay. Well, okay. So, like, basically, the thing that, like, I liked about the movie is you've got so many different elements packed into this one movie that just make it good. I mean, honestly.
Yeah.
So you've got this, like, supernatural mystery. You've got ghosts. You've got, like, it's kind of pretty, I mean, dude, honestly, if I would have seen this when I was 8, terrifying.
I think I
because
did,
like,
probably.
You know, this kid, that's what I was going to say earlier. It reminds me a little bit of, you remember in The Neverending Story when the kid like hides in the
thing, yeah.
in the thing at school. Same kind of thing here, except for like these bullies, essentially, which one of the bullies was the kid from
Big.
No. Well, yes, he's also in Big, but he was also in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Yep.
He plays like the younger brother of the neighbors or whatever.
He has like a flat top.
Yeah.
Like spiked hair. He's a jerk.
He's a jerk, man. In everything, dude.
Yeah. You feel like that's the way he is in real life.
He's probably super nice, but
he probably
you know, kind of like that kid that plays Malfoy or whatever. Like,
you're right. We hate him.
But you've got this kid that's in that like attic of the school. It's dark, and this is when he like witnesses this like ghost of a young girl.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is where like it starts to kind of get super interesting because it's not just, hey, there's a scary ghost in his school, right? There's like purpose behind this ghost. And then this supernatural mystery surrounding these child killings that have happened in the past. And what we were kind of talking about earlier with like the racial tension and stuff. And like I said, man, it's 1962, right? I think if you're going to make a movie based in 1962, you have to have that stuff in there.
Yeah.
And I think like the way that this guy did it, I love like, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's just perfect how, you know, there's a string of child killings.
Like 10, I think.
Yeah, something like that.
And it's over the course of many, many years, too.
Yeah.
Like the night that Frankie Scarlatti, Lucas Haas, our main little kid, so the bullies hide his new, like, toboggan or beanie, I guess, if you will, in the cloakroom, which is like a, you know, storage closet kind of thing. And you'll see on the cover of the movie what we're talking about. But so he goes back to get it. They lock him in there. Well, I think on that same night, the janitor, Willie, the black guy, you know, doing a little drinking on the job. And I think he passes out in the basement of the school. And so when all this kind of goes down, I think they find him like, you know, passed out in the school and kind of connect the dots.
Because one thing that happens to the kid while he's locked in this thing is, yes, he sees this apparition or whatever. But then after he sees this ghost of a little girl, like a dude comes into the coat room and notices this kid. Yeah. And then strangles him. That dude, see, that's the part I was thinking like, yes, the ghost was scary. But as a little kid, this dude strangling a little kid, holy smokes, right?
Yeah.
Terrifying. And so basically he's getting strangled and he basically has this like near-death vision or whatever.
Which is a little weird.
Yeah, see, it gets a little weird. But
when he's like flying
yeah,
through the town.
I expected Falcor would come around
that was
a second. But he sees this girl again, and she basically asks him to help her find her mom, right? Also, like, super sad, man. I mean,
pretty
heavy.
sad. Oh, well, actually, we're also leaving out when he's in they call it the cloakroom, which I
already said that.
No, I know, but I'm just saying, like, that's something we don't really, at least, I don't know. We don't. I've never used that before, but I guess that's what it was called. But little Frankie, before he's like woken up by all this stuff kind of taking place with the ghost, he's having a dream about his mom who had recently died. Yeah. And he sees her like in a coffin. And another known little fact is that's actually his real mom in real life.
Oh, the actor?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
Which is
that scene was kind of heavy too, man.
Yeah, I know.
Not exactly like a kid. This isn't a kid's Halloween movie. I wouldn't.
Yeah, I don't think so at all. One thing I will say that kind of did bug me a little bit. On the one hand, I think it's brilliant the way that they do this. Like, I think it's brilliant how they kind of like it's what's called the stone tape theory, where like a ghost or an apparition is like, you know, if you look as like a ghost as like a spirit or whatever, which I'm on the fence. I don't know what they are, but it's almost like something takes place in real life that you expel so much energy that you almost imprint on our plane of existence. So, you know, you go to this haunted house at midnight. Well, it's almost like it's just going to replay the same thing. It's like
a loop, right?
It's like a loop, yeah. And you're going to, that's why if you go to Gettysburg, you're going to see, soldiers that are still staring around like standing around the fire or
giving
wearing
it away, ruining it.
What?
Giving it away, ruining it.
No, I'm not.
I'm just kidding.
But the thing that so I think it's brilliant because they just show her, and then the killer or whatever, they never show him. So you're just seeing this girl like reacting to nothing basically, which is kind of brilliant. Yeah. Like, it's a really smart thing. My only issue though is that, like, if you're gonna go along with like the stone tape theory where you see her like replaying and like this whole event playing out where she's like, of course that's your favorite song, da 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 da, because the killer has like this song that he sings, like, have you ever seen a dream walking, which is also kind of scary. It's like a Bing Crosby song, but she's talking, and so it's this replaying of an event, which is the stone tape theory. But then after that moment, it's like then the ghost just goes on as normal, like communicating with Frankie. Yeah. And so that was a little odd.
It's like a mixture of theories or whatever.
It's like if she has free will and she's able to just show up and do whatever and talk to this kid, then like, why is she having to also replay this like really terrible thing that happened?
Yeah. So kind of coming back to this kid gets strangled out, basically. Has this vision while he's like, losing air. For whatever reason, whoever strangles him leaves him at the scene. That's when, he's found, he's revived. And so it's not just, hey, he was locked in the closet, lock up the freaking janitor. It's, hey, he was found in this closet or whatever, but he was also strangled.
Right.
And Willie is drunk on campus there. And so he's arrested immediately because, things don't look great, right?
And one of the police officers, which is an asshole, is like, well, he's black, so case closed.
Yep, exactly. And you kind of feel like there is like a sense, again, because I didn't know really where the movie was going or what was going to happen. You get this like sense like people are in on it a little bit. Like there's kids missing, in a way, and I think this happens a lot now, even not necessarily just like people getting blamed for crimes or whatever. That's not where I was going, but that the easy answer is like a great one to use for the police because, hey, look, we got him. Justice is going to be served. And the scary thing is that potentially, like in this movie, the killer could still be at large.
Right.
Right. I'm with you in that, like, I feel like to experience this movie, people, I think they should kind of, from here on, in terms of what we talk about, I don't really want to uncover a lot of plot, really, because I don't know. It's up to you, but I feel like there's kind of a lot. It gets a little,
yeah,
hard to explain a little bit.
Yeah, I think, and again, I don't know how much we're going in, but to me, and what was funny is like even seeing this, for this being a movie that was like so sort of like poignant to me as a kid and like stuck with me, I was always kind of confused of like what the whole Lady in White was because there's a few sort of like misdirects even as far as that goes. Mm-hmm. I mean, should we give it away?
Kind of. I mean,
basically, there's okay. So there's the little girl that's now the ghost. Her name's Melissa.
Okay.
She's strangled by this killer, and then I guess thrown off this cliff. Mm-hmm. There's this house like at the edge of town, which is kind of like the house in every small town that's
right.
Whatever, and
creepy.
Yeah, creepy and abandoned and all that. And she was thrown off the cliff. Well, then in response to that, I guess her mom like jumped off the cliff to like kill herself, maybe.
Yeah.
And then her mom's sister, which would be the aunt. This is what I mean as far as like the misdirect of like who's the Lady in White. And so the myth is like the Lady in White, which is Melissa, the little girl ghost's mom. Like she wanders the cliffs looking for her daughter, and then her sister it kind of went insane. So she's like this old lady who actually is Mona from Who's the Boss? Yeah, for all those 80s kids. But she kind of went nuts because her sister committed suicide and jumped off the cliffs. And so she lives in this abandoned house. And so that's what I mean. Like, It's funny because when I was watching it, like for some odd reason, I was thinking that she was the Lady in White. And then it's like, oh, no. She's well, I mean, she's nuts. But like when he wakes up in the house and there's like, I mean, quite literally a million candles.
Oh, yeah.
All over the house.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I kind of want to leave the ending. Like, I think people, this is a movie I think people should check out, especially if you like, movies that were made in the 80s. But, any kind of sort of, it's not like now watching it, it's not so much scary. It's just kind of like, it's more interesting than it is scary, really, and nostalgic because you get to see this like, well, I mean, no, trust me, dude. There's some heavy stuff like, being a parent, thinking it's just like it's a little much. But
that's all terrible. But I mean, I'm just saying, even just the visuals of like him being stuck in that closet and the way like that cold light of the moon. Well, honestly, this is one of the things that really scared me for some reason. Even now, it like immediately took me back as a kid when he's locked in the cloakroom and the school is closing, and he looks out that sort of half circle window at the top of the cloakroom. He looks outside and he can see a cemetery down below, and he sees like the two little bullies who are the little jerks who locked him in there. They're like running away, and the sun's going down.
Yeah.
And it's just like, oh man, this is like, it just, there's something about.
Just like you said, like with the way the guy filmed it and his storytelling, like he can invoke that sort of, know exactly what that feels like to be like, oh my God, I'm trapped and these guys are running away. Like they're the ones that could let me out. And then just having to like think about like, am I going to have to spend the night here? Like I've got to spend the night in this big building all by myself.
Yeah.
And it is kind of freaky. And so like, I think that the way that this guy tells this story, I think it is worth people, watching for themselves. And I mean, what I love about this movie and us kind of wanting to talk about it during the October Spectacular is it's not necessarily on the list, I think, when people think of Halloween movies, right?
Right.
Because it has a lot more of like a cult following. A lot of people listening right now probably hadn't even, heard of it before.
And that's why I don't want to give it away, because like, it is such a cool movie, especially if you're anything like us, and if you're listening to this podcast, you probably are. There's just that like such a strong like gravitational pull to like all things like nostalgic and your youth and like being dressed up in like badly made homemade costumes. And like there's just something that's so special and so magical about that growing up in the '60s for you, me the '80s.
Come on.
But even if you take away all the, you know, quote unquote, like horror aspects of this movie, just like the ephemera and like the vibe of the movie is totally worth the watch.
It immediately makes you feel like remember what it was like to ride your bike around your neighborhood, to you know, see your friends, to just go outside this time of year as a kid and just like look forward to, you know, seeing your crush around school, going and trick-or-treating, like all these things this movie kind of reminds me. And frankly, if you're into like true crime type stuff, this kind of has it. That's what I'm saying. Like it's got a mixture of all that stuff. There's some supernatural elements there, but it's not so necessarily over the top. You know, it all makes sense. There's a reason behind the supernatural piece. And and then again, you've got that sort of racial tension, social justice type realism that was the early 60s. And you know, I mean, I like that kid, man, Lucas Haas or whatever. He's awesome. He's a cool dude. Yeah, he was in My Chemical Romance, The Black Parade video. He's like a musician. He's been on like a lot of stuff. Mars Attacks. I swear we saw him when we were out in LA, dude. I 100% think I thought that too. Not when we were out in Silver Lake, but at what's the name of the not the Beauty Viper
Bar,
Room, maybe.
Yeah, well, we had our showcase at the Viper Room,
or maybe like the Rainbow. I don't know.
That's where we saw, dude. Is that where we saw Lemmy?
Yeah, it was.
It's awesome.
And you went over to him and you're like, "Hey, man, if you don't know who we're talking about Lemmy from Motorhead." Yeah. Tyler was like, "I'm gonna go buy. Yeah, no, too soon. I'm gonna go buy this guy a beer." So Tyler like walks over there, and then you know he's on the other end of this bar or whatever.
Yeah, kind of by himself. Off.
Yeah. He obviously doesn't want to be bugged by
not at all
anyone. But you know, hey, if you know anything about Tyler, he's gonna do it anyway.
Hey,
so we watch him sort of like walk down there. We see him like kind of have this, you know, exchange. Basically, Tyler kind of walks back and he's like, he said he didn't want one. So he was smoking a joint.
Yeah, so that's what was cool. Is like
long before weed was legalized.
Oh, right? Not even. Yeah, way long time ago. I walk up and I say, "Hey, man, big fan. You know, we're all the way out here from Atlanta. Can I buy you a drink?" And I realize, like, as I'm saying this, that like in his ashtray, and he's sitting like at the bar at the end, so it's like you can tell it's probably like
everyone.
Yeah, it's like his like personal little spot or whatever. And I realize he's just smoking a joint, and then he reaches like under, and there's like a shelf or something, and he held up like, you know, like a bottle of like Jameson or Jack or something. And it was funny because at the time I remember feeling kind of like a little deflated a little bit. But like in retrospect, it's like, no, that's actually way more bad.
Yeah.
That's as cool as it could have been, you know?
Yeah. And at least he was nice. He wasn't rude or anything like that.
Yeah.
You know? That
you wanted to fight that one guy that bumped into you, though.
Yeah, the poor guy, man. I just kept on standing in this doorway, and this, you know, he's not even a bartender; he's a bar back, which means you're hauling ice and dishes to and from, and I just kept on getting in his way. And he's like, "Hey, man, do you mind not standing in this doorway?" And I was just the whole rest of the night just staring him down. What an idiot!
And didn't he say something like?
Dude was like, he probably weighed 250 pounds of pure strength. And he was like a good, I don't know, he probably like 6'5" or something.
But he was super nice, though.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what was so funny.
Literally no reason why I should have been mad at this guy for any reason at all. And I was just an idiot, is what it was.
We've had a lot of those. Yeah.
I mean, you've probably definitely had a lot of just sort of idiotic moments. I mean,
thousands.
You know, but who's counting?
A couple things. The dad in the movie, Alex Rocco, was in The Godfather. He was the voice of Carmine Falcone in Batman Year One.
Rewind a little bit. He was in The Godfather. People that are fans of The Godfather, like myself, I literally watch it every single year during Thanksgiving. Yep. Like the whole trilogy.
Yep, same.
You might remember he's the one that basically Fredo betrays Michael.
Well, I'm actually lying because I've never seen the whole movie.
I know it was you, Fredo. You broke my heart. You broke my heart.
Well, that's that's tragic, man. But no worries.
Yeah.
This year's the year.
Okay, good.
I've got it on every format you can imagine, except for Laserdisc.
I was going to say, you got Laserdisc over there?
No, I do have a Top Gun Laserdisc, but I digress. Dude, here's now.
Wait, hold on,
sorry,
real quick.
Sorry.
So he was also in the '66 Adam West Batman show, which is amazing. He was on The Simpsons. He was on that Smoking Aces movie, which I saw a while back, and it's actually
It's a great movie, man.
great movie.
Oh, dude, he was in That Thing You Do.
God, you just stole my line,
dude. Well, you're taking a long time to get there. I didn't.
Yeah, he's the owner of Playtone Records, which That Thing You Do. If you haven't seen that movie,
come on, what's wrong with you?
One of the best movies ever made.
So good.
Yeah. Oh, another thing, the brother.
Come on, pretty baby.
The brother Gino is a kid named Jason Presson who was the third kid in Explorers. There was Ethan Hawke.
That's what I knew him from.
River Phoenix and this kid. Because he has that like great like voice, that like kind of.
Man, I was wondering I was like, where do I know this kid from?
Yeah.
And then I think it's just these two movies, and that's it.
Yeah, that is probably it. Go see this movie. It's awesome. I don't want to spoil it, anymore. I mean, I feel like we already kind of.
No, because we didn't. Well,
that's true. We haven't.
Yeah, we didn't talk about the whole ending, which is like a whole other thing. I mean, really, truthfully,
ending.
Yeah, part of the reason why I don't want to give it up isn't just so much because I don't want to spoil it. It's just the way that the storytelling is done. Even as good as we are at storytelling, I just feel like this guy did it right, and I think it deserves to be watched, man.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a good storyteller at all.
Almost didn't even get through that sentence.
It was a tough go.
Yeah, I'm
there for a
good.
Neither time.
Oh man.
But yeah, it is an awesome movie, and it's like, I don't know. I hope that it's not that sort of built-in nostalgia that like is why and I like it so much. But it is like just a lot of sort of.
No, dude, I would have ripped it to shreds. I like nostalgia too, but if it just didn't quite hold up, I would have said that, man. I think it does. I mean, it's got that small town vibe, like, and we're not talking about this other movie that I'm about to bring up right now, but I'm just saying I enjoy storytelling that doesn't have to use certain things as a crutch.
Right.
Like, there's certain movies that, like, especially as a kid, the only reason people watch them is it's just like, hey, man, but there's like a sex scene. That's cool and all, but I'm just saying if that's the crutch, then it's crappy storytelling. Same with like cussing sometimes or like gore, This is one of those movies that has like the suspense, the mystery, the supernatural element, no gore.
Yeah, that's true.
And another movie that's like that I didn't really realize, man, until I rewatched it recently is freaking Halloween, the original Halloween movie.
Really?
Yeah,
I haven't seen it in a long time.
Almost no gore, dude. The way that it's like obviously we're going to have to do this next year during the Spooktacular because, dude, it is quickly becoming my favorite part one of any of these franchises that we always talk about.
See, I was always Nightmare on Elm Street, so I always felt like it was a little too like primitive, like buffoon. And I think, bad guy,
I think a lot of, that's what I'm saying, dude. No, it's not really a buffoon bad guy. I know what you're saying, but I think a lot of people that are into the gore stuff probably think it's just like, lame. But to me, it's like the fact that they could tell the story, it could be terrifying. There's certain things that they use in Halloween, like you can hear him breathing in the mask and like just stuff like that is just freaky as heck, man. But anyway, we're not talking about that movie today.
Yeah. Well, real quick, Lady in White, there's so many sort of abstract ideas that honestly could have spiraled out into their own movie. And I think that's what makes it so great is there's so many like little threads that like, I mean, that aren't even really like subplots. They're just kind of like, hey, we're going to throw this out. And it's like, no, that could be a whole movie. Like have a whole movie on like the civil rights aspect of it, which, boy, the car scene.
Oof, man, I did not expect that, dude.
I kind of remembered it as it was happening.
Oh,
and I was
my
like,
God.
ugh.
Yeah.
But like,
I guess that's the only gore, really.
Yeah. It really is a brilliant movie. Go out and see it. And we'd love to hear about it. We'd love to hear what you think about it.
Now, here's one of the reasons why I was excited about doing this topic.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over 200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures.
From another dimension, another world, I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent.
Hey, this is Bryce Johnson from the Bigfoot Collectors Club, and you're listening to Tyler and Woody on That Would Be Rad, because that is rad.
All right. So it's so, well, now that we're doing this podcast, I can't really use the word coincidence anymore, but like the synchronicity about us and you wanting to do this movie for October Spectacular coincided exactly with the moment that I happened to be reading Where the Footprints End.
Where'd you get it?
You gave it to me for my birthday. Signed
there
copy.
It is. Yep.
It's a book by Joshua Cutchin and Timothy Renner.
Our buddy Tim.
And
hope you're well.
Yes. And also Timothy Renner hosts the Strange Familiars podcast, which is outstanding.
Yep.
One of our favorite podcasts that exists out there.
And I've actually been on that podcast before we started our podcast.
Well, and it's about the Lady in White, isn't it?
There is one. Yeah, we'll talk about that. Not this episode, but during the Halloween season.
Yeah. Okay. So anyways, I'm reading this book, and to give you kind of a synopsis of what this book is not necessarily about, but essentially it's approaching high strangeness and the Bigfoot phenomenon with, in this volume, it's a 2-volume series of books, and it kind of takes a look at like folklore. It basically looks at accounts throughout history and their either parallels, their similarities, or they're downright just exact copies of phenomenon that happen and how they relate to either Bigfoot sightings or Bigfoot events. Sometimes they're almost exactly alike. Sometimes they are simultaneous, and sometimes they're just, I mean, no matter what, it's all like super, super interesting. Everything from like wild men sightings, the Fae, alien UFO sightings, and these are broad topics. I mean, they dive super deep. Witches, ghosts, and of course, women in white.
Yep.
Now,
that's right.
I'm telling you, man, this book is full of those kind of moments when you're like, oh my gosh, I never thought of that. And like the way that these guys write it, man, it's just like Jacques Vallée. They're not trying to convince you of anything. They're literally presenting similarities. They're presenting these things for you to decide for yourself.
Yeah. I feel like Disembodied Voices is kind of along that line too.
Yeah. What's cool about the movie The Lady in White is it's sort of a loosely based on like the woman in white sort of
mythos.
Yeah, mythos that exists throughout culture around the world, dude. And so I think
in literally every culture.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things that like as you're it's something that I think is so ingrained in our own zeitgeist that like when you think of a ghost, you kind of think of a woman, you know what I mean? A woman who's wearing white. And I mean, when I say like all around the world, I'm really not even kidding you. I mean, everywhere from Brazil, Canada, Czech Republic, Estonia, Germany, Hungary, Ireland, Japan, Malta, Netherlands, Norway, Philippines, Russia, Switzerland, Thailand, the UK, and of course, here in the US, have some sort of version of this woman in white legend. It's basically a female ghost, again, typically dressed in a white garment of some kind, like a dress or just something really, especially here in the US, seen in rural areas and typically surrounding local legends of tragedy. And there's kind of like the connection between the movie that we just talked about,
right,
and also this sort of like legend.
Which, by the way, like one of the things that I think is worth noting is, at least for myself, it's like when you hear woman in white, you think of like sort of Victorian era, because it's been like sort of so profound in like pop culture. you know, as far as like ghosts and hauntings and like, oh, they're Victorian and they're, but it was really interesting to find like from the Philippines reaching way back before the Victorian era, you know, it just being some sort of white garment, you know.
Well, and there's variations of, you know, what, like, why are you seeing this person? What is their purpose? Like, a lot of them do lean towards sort of like in the movie where it's something tragic happened to them. They're kind of in and around that area, not necessarily in a loop, but can't be put to rest. Their soul can't move on until justice is served, kind of thing, you know? So from the book, man, some of this stuff, like, and I know that we're going to talk about these books, Where the Footprints End, in greater depth throughout this year. There's just so much that I just can't, like, literally as I'm reading it, I'm making notes, I'm underlining stuff. It's like a textbook, but not in a boring way. I mean, it's just like, I want to soak up so much of this information. But in the chapters where they're talking about the woman in white legend and how it potentially can relate to Bigfoot and stuff, it says, even when observed separately, Bigfoot and women in white share some common ground both geographically and thematically. Women in white, apparitions, and Bigfoot are both frequently seen along the roadside, on battlefields, and in graveyards. In the latter two examples, battlefields and graveyards, a lot of times they may sort of like be signaling an upcoming death. Here's something interesting too, that if any of you listeners are into, like, you know, Native American lore, a lot of Native American cultures regard Bigfoot as an omen of impending death. There are so many examples throughout the world, kind of like we talked about earlier, that especially, well, I'll give you an example. So everything from like a banshee. I was just about to say, think about this, dude. Yeah. When you start to read descriptions of banshees, right? What do? They're screaming, right?
They're wailing.
Yeah, wailing and making these weird noises off in the distance.
Or technically is it called like keening or haining?
Gosh, I don't know.
It's something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, similar accounts.
It's like crying, like mourning, like a sound of...
You could Google right now, listener, Bigfoot sounds. And there's going to be descriptions of people hearing what sounds like a woman crying in the woods. Or...
I've never thought of that.
Yeah, dude. Full body chills, man. As I'm reading this stuff, okay? Check out this one. So there's this Welsh equivalent to the Irish banshee, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce it in Welsh. But
go ahead and give it a shot.
Okay. Gwrach y Rhybian. I think that was pretty good.
Yeah,
you know,
good.
I think, do I speak Welsh now?
I think you do.
Okay, fluent. I'm going to add that to my CV. Anyway,
resume.
It translates to be the hag of the dribble. She comes at nightfall or after nightfall and flaps her leathery wings against windows of houses and warns of death with a broken howl. Now,
man,
again, if you're into Bigfoot, what does that sound like?
Yeah,
guys, we've heard reports of Bigfoots tapping on windows.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So I think like the foretelling of an upcoming impending death is kind of like relatively one of the most sort of popular reasons for the legend, especially throughout like Eastern Europe and that kind of thing. I mean, there are like some famous cases like the White Lady of Brandenburg, who basically was seen before the death of members of like high families associated with that house.
Isn't there one with like, isn't it pretty prevalent with like the death of children and stuff?
Yeah, so basically that kind of leads toward this other one. What you're talking about in terms of the connection between women in white and children, there is this, like, again, the White Lady of Rosenberg Palace, her name was Bertha, which itself is the medieval form of Perchta.
There you go.
Yeah, we're talking, right? Perchta was the Teutonic moon goddess, said to live in the mountains like Bigfoot. Okay. Said to have...
wouldn't Perchta, like, she was like on our Christmas episode, right?
No, I think we may have mentioned it when we talked about...
Why does that sound familiar?
Well, I'll tell you. Good, man. You're good. You've got this like encyclopedic knowledge that I just have to unlock. So people are like witnessing this happen in real time, but just keep listening.
Okay.
So basically she has this great love for children. She calls them from the wilderness which reminds me of another legend in Alabama, but we'll get there soon. Calls them from the wilderness. However, the children that go to her, the children that follow those calls, were doomed to death, dude.
Wow.
Now, just in case our listeners don't know, real quick, Bigfoot creatures also apparently have like a fascination with children, beckoning them into the woods in some cases. In 1902, a California family in Redding, California, reported that this like hairy wild man was watching their children. In March of 1902, the wild man threw stones, and after gaining attention of the child, beckoned to him while making a peculiar sound with its mouth. The Harrisburg Telegraph on November 18th, 1871, talked about a black-eyed wild woman who was as swift as a deer.
Wow.
With a great fondness for children, had leapt over a fence and carried off a toddler who was playing in a field.
Which, I mean, that's kind of like the Hansel and Gretel.
Right.
The Baba Yaga, the Slavic thing.
So kind of getting back to 𝘗𝘏, it's thought to be from Old High German, possibly meaning the bright one. Some legends even having the goddess 𝘗𝘏 clad in, you guessed it, all white.
Whoa.
She can appear as young and beautiful or elderly and haggard. Dude, I don't know if you want to get into this here, but Timothy Renner also connects this with, this is just so cool to me, dude. He says, connecting 𝘗𝘏 to those pesky three-toed Bigfoot tracks. It was said that one or both of Frau 𝘗𝘏's feet were quite large and took the form of a goose or swan's foot.
Wow.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah, that's a big thing. Even in the Kelly Hopkinsville goblins, they had like the three toes. And that is a big thing that Timothy Renner kind of touches on, like throughout, like cryptozoology is like, there are these weird little accounts of like the three-toed footprints.
Yeah.
Which are not typical for your,
standard, we'll say.
Yeah, your like Bigfoot hunter guys who just think it's a Gigantopithecus.
Right. Here's something else that's super interesting, man. So 𝘗𝘏 has, well, we'll call it an entourage. Okay. Some of them are the souls of children who died answering her call. They're known as 𝘗𝘏. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but please forgive.
You definitely did.
So those are actually visually manifested as like will-o'-the-wisps. So think back to other Bigfoot sightings when they talk about little orbs and lights.
Which, by the way, this feels a lot like the witch in the movie Brave.
Which my daughter won't watch anymore because she's terrified of the will-o'-the-wisps. So
really, well, I should definitely not. I've got a story about orbs that is pretty fascinating, but I'm kind of holding off.
Meanwhile, Frau 𝘗𝘏's other attendants in her entourage, basically, dude, it's like a straight line linking her directly to Bigfoot, because check this out. They're a horde called the 𝘗𝘏, a horde of frightening wild men with soot-black faces, wild hair, and covered by the skins of animals. And they descend from the wilderness, and this is where you remember it from, around Christmastide.
Yeah, I knew it. Yeah, that's cool.
And what they do is they harass people by throwing stones at houses. Now,
which is common
it's been
Bigfoot.
Many episodes since we did this, but we talked a little bit about rocks and stones being thrown at a cabin when we covered the Ape Canyon incident.
Yeah.
Fred Beck, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
And I'll get back to that in just a second. That is a pretty cool kind of connection between, I think we briefly mentioned her when we talked about Krampus. Back when we did the Christmas episodes.
Which, by the way, not to cut you off, but man, it's been a while since I cut you off.
Well,
even if you're a hardline skeptic and you think, oh, well, every single one of these things are just cautionary tales to keep kids out of the woods at night and to be in before dawn, sunset and all that. Like, there's still something that is so like high strangeness, so sort of like bizarre that it kind of lends more credibility to there being something to it, It's just very like oddly specific in like little areas that it's like, even if it was all sort of embellished, there had to be like something there first that kind of, prompted
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's just like account after account after account that has this really interesting connection to either wild man or a Bigfoot type creature and a woman in white. Like in 1910 in Iowa, there were a lot of reports of people kind of being terrorized by what they described as like a wild being. Mm-hmm. And they went on these searches and they formed all these like posses and stuff. And they went out into the wilderness looking for something, but they never found it. Then later in July of 1910, they discovered this body of a murdered man. And he was found like nude, floating in this river in the same area where this wild man had been seen. Now, this is where it gets even crazier, man. The following night, travelers that were kind of like on a nearby road were kind of passing the murder site. Mm-hmm. And as they got closer, they noticed a woman dressed in white emerge from the foliage, waving her arms.
Oh, wow. So was she trying to like sort of lure like a siren kind of
Well,
thing?
witnesses kind of reported that the being was possibly enacting a pantomime of the murder, much like in the movie that we talked about earlier.
Like a stone tape, like a loop. Mm-hmm. This kind of does feel like sort of the weeping, forlorn, like mother, like weeping for her child, like the La Llorona.
Dude.
Kind of thing.
Literally, next paragraph in the book, dude. Yeah, so what Tyler's talking about is a lot of kind of communities in Mexico and in the southern United States like have this legend of La Llorona, and which translates to be like the crying woman, which is a ghostly female who moans, screams, and cries in the night. Not always clad in white, but most of the representations of the La Llorona have that ghost sort of draped in white gowns and stuff.
But I think
she also has an affinity for children, dude, and said that like she kidnaps young ones before drowning them.
That's what I was about to say. I think she's different because it's like she kind of plays up this like, oh, I'm so sad, my child, whatever. But I think her deal is like she's upset because she's the one who drowned her children. And so by her moaning and like, mourning and stuff on the banks of like bodies of water, she lures children out to like drown them as well.
Yeah, there's kind of like a somewhat famous woman in white that's said to be in the village of Pond Bank, Pennsylvania. And the specter appears around this village's namesake pond. And it's supposed to be the ghost of a woman who drowned her child, like La Llorona.
Wow.
Or La Llorona. And then she drowned herself. And so, like, the local legend there, man, is that if you stand by the pond and chant, white lady, I have your baby.
Oh, that's right.
The spirit will appear.
Yeah, I've heard that. That's pretty scary.
By the way, in case you're, like, super smart about geography and you recognize the name Pond Bank, or perhaps maybe you live close to that area, it sits right on the edge of this forest. It's called the Mid-South Forests, and it's one of the most active areas for Bigfoot sightings in Pennsylvania.
Wow.
So there's,
which by the way, Pennsylvania, I think Timothy Renner lives in Pennsylvania. Yeah.
Now we kind of like touched on this, but you definitely brought it up when we were talking about the movie. Where we're at down south, we have several of these legends of our own. One of them being on the Gettysburg battlefields. You mentioned like people seeing sort of like soldiers sometimes sitting around a campfire or wandering fields, sometimes, kind of looking for limbs and that kind of thing. Gettysburg has actually been kind of a hot spot for even UFO sightings and mystery lights over the years. This Gettysburg woman in white is kind of seen around the area of what's called Spangler Spring. And, kind of more along the lines of like the more traditional sort of lore around women in white. She is a ghost of an unnamed woman who, in the 1880s, went to meet her sweetheart at this spring and then learned that he was promised to another. So she then committed suicide. And when the young man found her, he found her as she was just dying. And so like she like died in his arms is the way that the legend goes.
Wow.
Yeah. And so people, real dark. And so people kind of talk about seeing this woman in white in Gettysburg, and they attribute it to being her. Also, I mean, since we talked about it, Gettysburg also has Bigfoot and wild man encounters. Some people call it like the Gettysburg gorilla.
I did not know this.
Timothy Renner kind of talks about how it could be more than one creature because the reports of the Gettysburg gorilla, the size varied from everything from 5 feet tall to over 7 feet tall.
Wow.
But in 1921, it brought a flap of these gorilla sightings throughout Pennsylvania, which, if you kind of go through them, almost sound like they're modern day sightings. I mean, just even from like simple roadside crossings to creatures peeking in windows and attacking dogs.
See, and that's the stuff that you and I think that's so fascinating, because it's like, what's even more fascinating than like aimless sort of spirits walking around Gettysburg is the idea of like, no, let's go back further. When like these soldiers were sort of camped in the area, they're getting taken out by these like Bigfoots or Big Feet. Well, no, Bigfoots, I think. Like,
I think it's just Bigfoot.
Or yeah, I guess. That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. This one's a little closer to home, which I love, and we have to take a field trip there. Another famous Civil War battlefield is Georgia's Chickamauga. And in Chickamauga, there's two really interesting legends that exist. One of them, of course, is a woman in white legend who is said to be the spirit of a mourning woman whose fiance was actually killed in battle. She's seen in conjunction with mystery lights. She supposedly has this like torch that she carries across the battlefield, and so people report seeing a young girl in like a wedding gown, which again, white dress, right?
Yeah.
Carrying a torch like off in the distance, man, in Chickamauga.
Wow.
Just roaming and roaming.
Wait, where is Chickamauga?
It's like northwest Georgia. And it borders Tennessee as well, but it's like Fort Oglethorpe area.
The reason I ask, because when I used to work at Ingalls as a kid, this woman told me this story. You know, she was like an older lady. She said that the only way to get to this like old house homestead was to be on this dirt road for like 15 miles. So it took you forever to get out there. But it's still owned by like the original family or whatever. Something happened. This guy was off at war, comes back home to the house when the wife had went into town or whatever, and he finds letters that she had been having like an affair on him while he was off at war. And apparently he ended up like killing the whole family while she was gone, and pretty dark stuff.
Yeah.
But apparently this house, or this old homestead, was left like exactly like the notes are still scattered on the bedroom floor. Apparently there was a ghost of like the woman, because she was gone, and like I guess the husband had like killed all 5 children, and so you see sightings of like the woman looking for her kids.
Man.
So I wonder if like, I'm sure if we looked hard enough we could find. I'm definitely gonna look at. I haven't thought of this in years and years, but that's interesting.
Yeah, man. I mean, I'm sure there's connections there. I think all these legends kind of have these similarities, you know, like it's always sort of like a woman that's some sort of tragedy has befallen, you know, and for whatever reason, that, like you said earlier, that energy, I don't know. It's interesting, man. Oh, but before we kind of get away from Chickamauga, there's also a really interesting legend that is tied to the area for that time period called Old Green Eyes.
It sounds familiar, but I don't know what it is.
Again, just something else that really kind of ties these two entities together in a very strange way. So there's this corpse-eating monster that's been lurking around Chickamauga since the battles began, like the Civil War time, during the Civil War. And so as the story goes, this large, wait for it, hairy creature with like these green piercing eyes we're seen picking over the corpses of the Confederate soldiers and then pulling and making off with the bodies during breaks in the fighting.
Wow.
This dude that was like the chief historian of the battlefield named Edward Tinney, said he saw old Green Eyes while hiking on a trail in the park on a foggy night back in 1976. And he said he described it as something that was human in shape, yet inhuman. Long
Wait a minute.
hair.
So it's been around since the Civil War and then
Still
seen
being
again in the
seen.
70s?
Oh, yeah. Still being seen.
That's awesome.
Yeah, dude. It has long hair, shining greenish orange eyes, fang-like teeth. And he says the creature wore a dark cape that seemed to be flapping in the wind, but there was no wind that night. So I don't know if this is like a Count Green Eyes or what, but that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm. But before we close it out, man, let's talk a little bit about Ape Canyon for a second.
Mm-hmm.
I think we did something that a lot of people are kind of, quote unquote, well, I'd say criticized for, but also guilty of. And that is like condensing the story of Ape Canyon into kind of a well-packaged sort of story of Bigfoot, right? There are several details that in the time capsule that we did about Ape Canyon, we didn't really put in there. I think we talked about it briefly during the episode, but I wanted to make sure, especially as it relates to the women in white, that we kind of touched on them real quick here, because there is this sort of like spiritual aspect to Fred Beck that, like I said, we briefly kind of talked about, but we didn't really dive into too heavily because it was, whatever.
Yeah, he would have like spirit guides almost.
Yeah, dude, he had a large Native American man appeared to him and his fellow miners.
And what was it called? Because I think he named sorry, my mic. I think he named the site.
Oh yeah, no, dude. Just wait.
Okay.
So the Native American kind of appears to the miners before they had found the mine, and the Native American basically told the miners to follow a white arrow that would appear to them.
That's right.
Right, and then they should follow it. The miners followed the white arrow. So Fred Beck and his friends followed this white arrow to what would become their mine. Now, Fred also writes in his journal about being visited by another entity. He doesn't exactly describe the entity in the journal, except that he notes that it was a woman who acted as a comforting friend. And this is super interesting. They would go on to name their mine after the female spirit. The mine's name was Vander White.
Holy cow, that's awesome. That is so
incredible,
cool.
Right, man?
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, because I remember you kind of laid out a lot of like what was known, and I remember me getting really big into like all the sort of weird stuff about Fred Beck. Because I think he would claim to see these sort of spirit guides like even as like a child.
Yeah.
You know, which was super interesting.
Yeah. And I think with that episode in particular, I think it was just like a time thing. I think we just try to condense the episode a little bit. So I wanted to make sure that we at least brought it up here and kind of ended on that note, because what an incredible, and then they went on to have that Ape Canyon experience, of course.
Yeah.
So
pretty scary.
Whether or not the lady in white, if you see her, is telling of your impending death or doom, maybe it is an entity that is because of some tragic loss or some tragedy that, befell them. Whatever the case, I would just, recommend avoiding it. I think so. But if you're taking the movie Lady in White as a lesson, perhaps we should be helping them. I don't really...
There's a lot of mixed messages.
There's a lot of mixed messages, yeah.
One thing that's not a mixed message is I think this was a great episode. I think the topic, we covered a lot of ground today. And I think the movie itself is fantastic. And if you haven't seen it, go see it. And if you haven't seen it in a long time, go rewatch it. I think the Lady in White mythos, which we may end up coming back to this because it is a pretty fascinating kind of
topic. At least aspects of it, for sure.
Yeah, especially just the fact of, much like Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever, it is this sort of world, connectivity where, you'll hear about her in Russia, you'll hear about her in you know, the Philippines and just all over. And that's such a fascinating thing. And I'm sure we'll reconvene back with the Lady in White one of these days.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, by the time you're listening to this episode, that means there's only one more week left of our October Spectacular. But I can promise you that we're going to end it with a bang just like we did last year. And so you're not going to want to miss next week's episode. So be sure, with whatever podcast app you use or love to use, that you're subscribing to our podcast so that you never miss an episode. That would be the worst.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
No.
It's kind of like getting like raisins when you go trick-or-treating. Like, what? Come on. At least for the one time in the year, promote like unhealthy behavior like eating candy. You know? We can get raisins next time.
Oh, God. I'm not a fan of raisins.
Well, I love raisins, just not when I'm trick-or-treating.
Well, I like raisins by themselves. I don't like them in cinnamon buns.
Oh, I love it.
Wait, is that right?
Throw them in, yeah, sure.
Cinnamon rolls?
Yeah, whatever you want to call them.
Oh, no, I'm thinking honey buns. I like honey buns because they do not have raisins, but yeah, cinnamon rolls.
Dude, I like to throw raisins in oatmeal and get them all like, they kind of get plumped up. It's good stuff, dude.
Put a little in your hair.
Dude, where is the best place for people to interact with us?
The only place you can find and interact with us is, well, that's a lie, is Instagram, where we have a nice little family growing. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on the Lady in White movie, the Lady in White urban legend, the mythos just in general. We'd love to hear what you think about it. If you've heard of a particular urban legend or
in
something.
Your area.
Yeah, in your area, because those are the things that we really like to hear. That's the stuff that's like, it kind of, helps connect us all together to this sort of overarching kind of thing. If you do have stuff you want to tell us, stories, whatever, feel free to DM us. If it's more long form, shoot it to thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. And like I always say, I know it's getting close, but if you have a spooky story, if you have something that happened to you, whether super mundane or short, or because we get a lot of people that are like, well, I've had this happen to me, but it happened so fast that there's not really much to it. It doesn't matter. We want to hear all those things. So feel free to send us a voice recording or whatever. Also, while I'm giving orders, get out there and tell one friend about the podcast, because that's all it takes.
That's it.
We just doubled our listenership just like that.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm getting excited about Halloween, man. I feel like it's gone so fast, though.
I know, man. I know. I'm excited, too. It's going to be fun.
Well, we really love you guys. It's because of you that we keep this train a-rolling. And without you, I don't know that we would do it. So, like we always say, we appreciate you. We love you. Stay spooky out there. And as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes. My favorite song on the radio. You were all black clouds in a time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead, for you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers, but now all that's left is a single rose. That's the way it goes.
Man, yeah, that's amazing. I'd never thought about like the screams, like the lady crying, with hearing that same thing with Bigfoot.
Man alive. Either way, you hear somebody screaming in the middle of the woods. Oh, and that, that reminds me, dude. One of my first campouts, we moved to Georgia, middle of the night. We just hear this crazy scream in the middle of the night, dude. And in fact, dude, maybe I'll tell that story. I'll just like,
Yeah, there's a, remember Cooley Woods? We were just talking about this. Cooley Woods next to my house.
Cool World?
No, although I did love that movie. There is like a legend around that area where there's like this woman that's like half panther, half woman. And that a lot of it came from like hearing these like crying / like cat like like kind of a hybrid of the two sounds. People would say they would hear around that. It's that same area that we were just talking about, but like where you would drive and like up on the hill, you see the little tree.
Dangerous Minds.
I used to know every lyric.
I know, man. It's amazing. All right, dude, I got to roll.
Yeah, we got to get her.
1, 2, 3, stop.
Okay.